Welcome to FRE Lunch, the official podcast of the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. I'm Elena Poulin, the Marketing and Communications Specialist for the department.
And I'm Caleb Stair, Assistant Instructional Professor of Food and Resource Economics and the Coordinator for Undergraduate Research in the department, meaning I get to interact regularly with the members of our UF community and see all the cool and interesting topics being explored.
That's why we made this podcast, to showcase the many ways students and faculty are using research to understand and address the complex issues facing agricultural and natural resource industries.
In 2025, there's lots of interesting issues that economics can be applied to, but that's only one faucet of the whole solution.
To get the complete picture on one of these issues, we're teaming up with the UF Water Institute and new co-host Sarah Mark for a deep dive into the fathoms of Florida's fresh water.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mark, the Communications and Events Specialist for the Water Institute. Essentially, we serve as a connector between collaborators across the university and beyond.
From rinse to recycle. That's right. Today we'll be talking about reclaimed water on the podcast.
As we know, water is an inexhaustible resource. While it might always be there, it can't always be used in the ways that we need it to.
That's why figuring out a way to make more of it available is a good idea, and why reclaimed water is a topic of discussion.
Coming from Pennsylvania, I had never heard of water before I moved to Florida.
You mean reclaimed water?
Right.
Anyway, reclaimed water is basically water that previously was used, but after a purification process can be used again.
Now, depending on where you are from, these uses might be limited to certain activities. Regardless, though, it does extend the usefulness of the water.
Because this technology is relatively new, lots of people might have questions or reservations about its use. So, to reveal the reality, we are here today with two special guests.
First up is Don Rainey. He is a regional specialized agent of the Southwest District for UF IFAS Extension.
I've been an agent for 20 years, focused on commercial horticulture, plant science, and point source pollution. And so encouraging and teaching professionals on how to address the nutrients and chemicals that they're applying in the landscape and how important it is to follow practices that are recommended by the UF IFAS Extension.
You might recognize our second guest from the first season of the podcast, where she discussed food waste. But we are once again joined today by Dr. Olesya Savchenko, Assistant Professor of Food and Resource Economics.
So I am originally from Odessa, Ukraine, and I grew up on the Black Sea. And I've always admired how beautiful it was. And as I was growing up there, I realized all the pollution challenges that were involved with the Black Sea. And that was the beginning of me being really interested in water issues.
And after taking a micro-econ class in undergrad, she chose to explore water through the lens of economics.
As I said, I was really interested in water pollution issues. And at some point, it became clear that if I want to make an impact, I really need to either go into the science side of things or into the policy. And economics and policy, obviously, go hand in hand. And so thanks to that professor, actually, I ended up going to grad school and getting a PhD in applied economics with a focus on research on water.
So for the sake of all our audiences, could you tell us what is reclaimed water?
Yeah, so reclaimed water actually came on the scene back in the 70s, St. Pete area, and it's basically a treated wastewater. And depending on the stages of treatment, is the stages of use. And so there's basically 3 stages of treatment, and that is the removal of solids, removal of organic complexes, and then pathogens. And then from that point, it's generally a state of quality that's usable for non-potable sources.
Once the water has gone through these 3 stages, at least in Florida, it's usable for almost anything except for drinking.
So within that matter, it can be used with irrigation, such as your golf courses, landscapes, and lawns, or it could be used in ag situations that are, of course, regulatory means, meaning particular crops it can be used on. And then it could be used in industrial uses such as air conditioning. So it does have a great function in the environment and also protecting natural resources. So that these are, as we all know, water scarcity for fresh water is growing due to population growth.
So worldwide, we know that there are about 4 billion people or roughly 2/3 of the global population that lives under conditions of severe water scarcity at least 1 month of the year. And 500 million people in the world face severe water scarcity the entire year. And so these are pretty substantial numbers. Now, coming back to Florida, Florida also faces growing water shortages and growing water demand because we are a rapidly growing state, and we are also going to experience more and more impacts of the changing weather. And our agricultural crop acreage that needs to be irrigated is growing, and so it's projected to increase. And so we have this overall need and increased demand to irrigate our crops, and therefore we'll need more water to do that.
This technology obviously sounds like it has a lot of potential, especially given the need. But how do you get from used water to useful water?
So within the treatment itself, the standards are you have a sewage fluid comes into the treatment plant, and so it removes the solids, and then it goes on to remove secondary treatments will remove organic complexes, dissolved organic matter, and other constituencies that we may find in that water. The tertiary treatment comes in and it actually begins to really scrub the water, so to speak, and also disinfects it before it goes out to a holding pond, holding tank, or in that matter. So as legislation has put it in 2020, the effluent that comes out has to be tertiary treated now. So that's adding another, I guess, somewhat of a benefit to society is that this water is actually cleaner now. Yet it can't be used for drinking water just yet.
While it's not used for drinking water in Florida, that doesn't mean that's the same everywhere else.
If we can be effective mitigating that stigma, potentially we could use it for direct potable use. And it is used in some areas and in other countries, such as Israel. It is very prevalent, and Israel in general has implemented the use of recycled water very successfully. So I think we're going to see this more and more as we look to the future and experience more water shortages.
Just like Olesya mentioned, there is some chance of hesitancy or stigma surrounding water that was once in the sewer system and is now being used in the food system.
Yeah, so when you think about it, we have a really stable everyday supply of wastewater. And it makes sense why let this water go to waste when we can recycle it using the technology that we already have and put it to good use. The challenge is that people associate recycled water as water from toilet to tap. And because of this association, it leads to a yuck factor. And that's the biggest challenge, this negative public perception.
Just to be clear, this water is safe, but there does seem to be a little bit of a gap in understanding between experts and the general public. Educational outreach efforts are critical to closing that gap.
I think just the name recycled water, meaning where'd it come from? Well, it came from your sewage treatment plant. That is the stigma, I think, that is the biggest one. And then people start to kind of pick it apart. Without education, that's the major component is education and outreach, to let them know the stages, the filtration methods, and the uses that this water is going to be used for.
Here in Florida, where the population is constantly growing, we also have a unique problem in that even if we educate the people here, there's always new ones who are going to need that information.
Those coming into Florida may have never heard of it from up north or been, acclimated to the use of it. And so that is a stigma, that is a struggling point for a lot of people coming in. But once they understand this source, which is color-coded, by the way, all reclaimed water used within public areas and even ag and industrial situations has to be a colored purple. And there's an ANSI number for that. But it has to be the distribution devices, and meaning the sprinklers, the pipe, the manifolds, anything that has to do with the reclaimed water has to be color-coded. So that's the first educational point that we can deliver to the public and to the users of it is this is the supply line for reclaimed water.
Addressing these stigmas is critical to public adoption of reclaimed water use. Already, people are implementing creative new ways to address the yuck factor.
It's important to understand consumer preferences and find creative ways sometimes to deal with that stigma. So, for example, Arizona, a few years back, had this Arizona Pure Brew Challenge. And what they did is that they took wastewater, they put it through a 5-stage purification system and got it to a point where it was safe and it was, of potable quality. And then they partnered with a bunch of local breweries and they asked those breweries to brew beer using that recycled water. And I can tell you, people did not care that beer was made with recycled water, and it was really good and popular. And this is just an example of how we can be creative trying to get rid of that stigma.
So that's how we as members of the general public felt about it. But what do we know about how it translates to agricultural use specifically? Are there things that make reclaimed water attractive or challenging to farmers?
Definitely, it's a reliable source of water for them. Yes, they have the infrastructure and cost involved is important too. So all those considerations aside, they have a reliable source of water, even through drought. And they also have a quality of water that shouldn't affect plant health. The only thing we're concerned about with reclaimed water in ag situations is salinity. And that's one thing through treatment technologies is still trying to catch up with. So salinity may have an issue with plant health with ag situations. The other thing is what's the actual crop that's being applied to is a question. Regulatory policies control that. So there's some technical considerations regarding, is it a vegetative crop? Is it skinless crop? Or does it have a skin? So what we're trying to avoid and what the regulatory means are saying, we don't want this in contact with the food itself that you're going to consume. So there has to be a barrier. But yet again, there's only specific crops we're going to Florida that to be allowed to be used on. Of course, it can be reviewed for another opinion, but there's a lot more regulatory, oversight in the ag industry.
For the food products that can be grown using recycled waters, there are still challenges when it comes to marketing those products due to consumer acceptance.
So in addition to, making sure that they have access to recycled water, that, wastewater that was treated up to a standard that it's okay to use it for agricultural use, I think the biggest concern farmers may have is with lack of consumer acceptance of these products. So the farmers may be very open to using recycled water, but if they fear that these agricultural products are not going to be purchased by consumers or they will be purchased for a lower price, then they may not want to use this technology. And so this is like a two-part problem. On one hand, we want to make sure that we understand the consumer preferences, and then we want to understand how we mitigate the stigma so that farmers feel open to using this technology as well.
Several factors contribute to consumer hesitance, but the main ones are fear of what's new and safety concerns.
It just triggers this negative visceral reaction in people, and it's just this psychological reaction where when people understand that this water was in contact with contaminated source or something gross, then it's always in contact, no matter how many stages of purification it has gone through. Neophobia also contributes to this feeling of just stigmatizing recycled water because of this yuck factor. And that's because people just often feel kind of uncomfortable trying new and unfamiliar foods. And that's just something that's wired in us as humans to help us survive. And then finally, safety concerns. People may worry about long-term health impacts of recycled water. They may also have trust issues. Has this water been really purified to the best standards, to those standards that are okay to use it for irrigation or even drinking? And so together, these factors contribute to this overall yuck factor and stigmatization of this really great technology of recycled water that can be used to grow our food.
Interestingly, it does appear that consumers may be more comfortable with the product based on the degrees of separation or processing that happen.
But as we move on this sort of processing of foods, so, something could be irrigated with recycled water, but then if it's an input into a processed food, people don't seem to care as much. So that's totally okay. Another thing that's really cool is that it seems that injecting recycled water and putting it through a natural barrier is really what does the trick. And this already happens to an extent in California. So the recycled water wastewater can be recycled, and then it can be injected into underground aquifers. And then it can be taken from those underground aquifers for direct potable use or for irrigation. And people seem to be okay with that, according to our research. So basically putting this, wastewater that was recycled through this natural barrier that's an aquifer and then drawing out of it makes a big difference.
As we've discussed, one barrier to farmer use of reclaimed water is product demand. However, another is the infrastructure needed, which can make it more expensive to adopt in rural areas than urban ones.
So infrastructure is required. First, you have to have infrastructure to treat it. And so that's very expensive. When we talked about technologies now, technologies to come, still will be a cost. So infrastructure for one to provide the supply, and then you have distribution. So you've all been going through new communities. You've probably seen the purple pipes coming out of the ground, or pipes going into the ground. They're white for potable and purple for non-potable. And so that's all infrastructure is what I'm referring to, and that comes with costs. So contracting that. Typically with ag, you're in rural situations, so it's going to cost you even more unless you're just a pristine area, not pristine, but an area that has it being made already, so to speak. It's been supplied locally. So yeah, the rural cost is going to be more expensive. However, there may be ways to get your return on investment in that crop.
So, if our audience takes away one thing from this episode, what would you like it to be?
Drinking water is safe, and it should be used to offset our impacts that we're having and will have water scarcity as it relates to fresh water. We drink fresh water, so it's important to look for alternatives and solutions to make sure that we still have that coming under the channel.
Wrapping up, perhaps the biggest hurdle with this relatively new technology is stigma or public acceptance.
And this is another reason why water is such an interdisciplinary subject, because even a cool new technology needs to be marketed to its potential audience.
Whether that is a farmer who's looking to increase the water they have access to,
or a consumer weighing if to eat that farmer's product or not.
We at least hope this episode has narrowed the gap between an expert and the general public.
If you found this topic interesting or want to learn more, check out the information listed in the episode description about different work being done across the University of Florida on the topic of recycled water.
If you've made it this far, you've finished the entire episode, and we thank you for that. Tune in next time for more food for thought. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of FRE Lunch. We hope you'll come back again for seconds.